America, welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. Finally, a Friday. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. President Trump calls for an immediate investigation into the skyrocketing wealth of Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, claiming it's just not possible to make that much money in 1 year while working only as a politician. The ringleader of the convicted food fraudsters in Minnesota now claims that Governor Tim Walz knew about his state's massive welfare scams for much longer than he's willing to admit. And hundreds of organizations in Minneapolis lock up shop as part of an organized economic blackout to protest the Trump administration's federal immigration crackdown. Also, a disturbing new report links a number of California Democrats directly to the Chinese Communist Party, and a popular Hollywood celebrity shocks local diners when he shows up incognito to chow down on a fast food double burger with cheese in a remote desert town. All this and a bunch more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with this. President Trump has apparently reached a breaking point concerning the inexplicable, an astronomical sudden rise in Representative Ilhan Omar's personal wealth, and he's now demanding that a thorough investigation begin immediately. You know, tons of folks, myself included, have been saying that same thing for a long time now, and we all know it's long overdue. The president says that right now Omar claims she's worth more than $30 million and that there's no way in hell she would be able to accumulate that kind of cash simply on a politician's salary, at least not legally. Yeah, 47. Tell us more. He goes on to say that for that reason alone, the allegedly crooked Congresswoman should be immediately investigated for potentially committing both financial and political crimes, and that in his humble opinion, for the good of the entire country, the probe should start right now or in the next 12 to 15 minutes. Chop, chop, man. There's work to be done. In the meantime, the Somalia-born Minnesota Democrat is already facing heavy scrutiny from the highly influential House Oversight Committee, which is currently looking into the financial dealings of both Omar and her wheeler-dealer hubby, that guy called Tim Minette. For her part, Ms. Omar seems to be completely unfazed by all the noise regarding her baffling and staggering newfound wealth, going so far as to openly brag about her family's astonishing run of luck on her most recent official congressional disclosure forms. Now, we'll break down the math for you coming up, so stick around. In those papers, she reveals a remarkable one-year turnaround in personal fortune, during which her net worth balloons from nearly nothing to tens of millions of dollars, and all with no apparent source of revenue whatsoever for her husband's suddenly extremely valuable venture capital firm and winery. That's some kind of wine. In the meantime, Omar is hard at work doing what she does best, pushing a bunch of those hefty lefty bills on Capitol Hill and stirring up boatloads of trouble for the good people of Minnesota. For the most part, she's concentrating her efforts on shamelessly attacking ICE efforts in her congressional district whenever she gets the chance, all while repeatedly accusing the Trump administration of continuously committing state-sanctioned violence. Final thought, and this is what we call the News Roundup Lowdown. And here's the way I see it. And I've always said that a government job is a guaranteed path to financial success. Now, check this out. My Uncle Jeff, for example, worked for the U.S. Post Office for 24 years. And when he retired, that was back in 1988, I believe, this guy had amassed a small fortune. Yeah, called it quits with nearly $12,400 in his savings account. Now look, Unky Jeff, he worked for the government. He earned a modest federal employee salary, and he retired a multi-thousandaire, but nobody investigated him. So the way I see it, nobody ought to be investigating this Ilhan Omar either. I call her the Queen of Innocence. And in the past, I think I've affectionately referred to her as my little bucket of sunshine. By now, it's a matter of public record that Ms. Omar pulls down a $174,000 annual salary for her little job as a congressperson representing Minnesota's 5th District. Might sound like a lot of dough, but I'll tell you, after taxes, take-home pay about $125,000. Now, if you had absolutely no bills to pay and you planted that entire amount into the bank, in 1 year, I've done the math, I checked it out, with an interest rate of 23,900%, you would have $30 million. America, stick with me. There's always a logical explanation. Does that make her guilty? No, it makes her a savvy investor, if in fact that was her path to riches. And footnote to that story, if you happen to know of any of those banks that offer interest rates like that, leave us a comment right here, and that way everyone's going to have their fair shot at earning $30 million, and pretty quickly too. So, Mr. President, you go right ahead and investigate Ms. Omar, but in my estimation, she's clean as a whistle, and there is absolutely nothing to see here. Turning now to a stunning jailhouse confession concerning Minnesota's largest welfare fraud scam and the potential criminal incompetence of Governor Tim Walz. We like to call him Time's Up Tim. Adding to a chorus of recent accusations, the woman convicted for her leading role in the state's Feeding Our Future scandal, Amy Bach, is now pointing her finger directly at the governor and claiming that both he and his fellow Democrats were well aware of the fraud for much longer than they're all letting on. Speaking from her cell in county lockup, where she awaits sentencing and faces decades behind bars, the fraud ringleader now says that despite protests to the contrary, state officials continued approving and then paying out a large number of taxpayer-funded benefits to corrupt organizations long after fraud concerns were first brought to their attention. Furthermore, she alleges that even after she rolled over and identified a number of suspicious companies to those same officials, they completely ignored her warnings and instead continued to fork out the dough rather than pause their payments long enough to do an investigation. The convict goes on to say that in her mind, both Governor Walz and his sidekick, Attorney General Keith Ellison, they should be held accountable for their negligence, that she truly believes they knew what was going on, and that there needs to be a thorough probe into their actions. She also says that if the dynamic duo wasn't aware of what was going on right under their noses, as they now claim, that's even more alarming. And I kind of agree. For their part, Ellison's team basically says that the stool pigeon has no idea what she's talking about, that she completely lacks credibility, and that she's a liar, fraudster, and manipulator of the highest order. Well, they kind of got a point with that last one. But she can't be all bad, and maybe she's a big hit on the karaoke circuit at the local bowling alley. I don't know. In the meantime, even America's favorite grandpa, Bernie Sanders, is appalled by what's going on in Minnesota, saying that stealing money from a program to feed hungry kids is completely disgusting behavior, which should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. And look at Bernie actually stepping up to the plate, doing and saying the right thing. Additionally, Vice President J.D. Vance chiming in with some breaking developments as well, and he says that based on recent findings, now appears as though Minnesota's massive welfare fraud is a drop in the bucket compared to what's going on in my home state, right here, California, that the Trump administration has already pinpointed nearly $7 billion in the Golden State fraud, and that it's only the tip of the iceberg to what they're likely to discover. Hey, California, in my mind, you're the next star on the Big News Roundup, and I'll tell you now, get ready for your close-up. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Just for clarification, over the past several days, thousands of people have left comments for us right here complaining that nothing has been done and nobody's been held accountable for a disgusting amount of fraud which has happened in the state of Minnesota. Not exactly accurate, and as we pointed out on a number of occasions and right here on the program, literally dozens of people have already been convicted and they're serving time in the joint. Now, one of those convicts is more than happy to throw some folks under the bus, and listen carefully to what this Amy Block prisoner is saying. She was arrested, tried, found guilty. She's behind bars, and at this point, why not rat out the other guys? Yeah, she was there ground level in on the scam, and she's being very candid when she says the governor and the attorney general, we call them the tag team of Walz and Ellison, they were aware of the fraud before the big guns, the federal prosecutors, jumped in. What more evidence do you need? Stay on the trail. Stick with the program. More of those highfalutin Minnesota arrests, they're going to happen real soon. And in time, we think some of the more high-profile players will appear before the cameras to have their mugshots taken. And if Editor Pranov were here right now, I'm sure he'd show us a mugshot right over my shoulder of that Tim Walz fella. Pranov the Magnificent. Are you in the building anywhere nearby? I can't see what's happening over my shoulder, but I hope it's there. Now, look, I'm no highfalutin government official, but if I was running the state, I'd know full well of hundreds of millions, and by some accounts, billions of dollars were being stolen on my watch. At the very least, even if folks like Walz didn't know, then he should be charged with gross malfeasance, incompetence, unsavory ineptitude, and just, for good measure, clumsiness, because he looks kind of clumsy. All right, change things up just a bit now and turn our attention to Minneapolis, where thousands of angry protesters just held this massive anti-ICE rally, all to express their extreme displeasure with the Trump administration's aggressive presence in their city. I'm with them. How dare the Trump administration uphold the law? How dare they? Calling their demonstration a day of truth and freedom, the agitators who threw together the event began by urging local business owners to close their stores for the day as part of a widespread economic blackout throughout the entire area. They then went on to ask the entire community to skip school, play hooky from work, I kind of like that part, and stop shopping as well. All pure genius. Later, thousands of people were seen braving extreme frigid outdoor temperatures as they marched together in the downtown area and banged on a bunch of drums, all before proceeding to a nearby arena for a large indoor ice-out gathering. Meanwhile, despite a calming visit from Vice President J.D. Vance on Thursday, the entire Twin Cities area remains a potential powder keg, with unruly demonstrations and unlawful protests stretching all the way from Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport to the nearby Federal Building. That's a pretty big protest. Making things worse, a number of young children have apparently been publicly seized by immigration enforcement officers and targeted for removal from our country, further whipping the already furious crowds into a complete lather. Calm down. And for their part, the Department of Homeland Security says that tensions in the area would ease off completely if Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey gave ICE agents access to their state's detention facilities. They claim that right now there are more than 1,300 criminals with active ICE detainers currently being held behind bars in Minnesota, and that both Walz and Frey should do the right thing by honoring those binding orders and handing over the culprits before they get released back out onto the streets and only to do more damage. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. This is just brilliant, and it clearly illustrates why running off to university to take a paper or one of those fancy leering degrees is a complete waste of time. Look, I know a thing or two about rubbish, all the rubbish they teach in business school. Things like metrics, supply chains, data analytics, marketing, economics, and all that other useless junk. It's all hogwash, and the only intelligent and efficient way to run a business is the Minneapolis way. That's where you sit and wait for the federal government to drop in to protect and secure the United States of America, arrest people who are breaking the law, and then close your business and take the rest of the day off. Why didn't I think of that? Sales, profits, and growth for any business, that's old school nonsense. And if you want to sock it to the feds, this is the best way to do it. Close the shops, stores, and restaurants, and that's going to show them. Although, and I'm just kind of thinking out loud, I hope these businesses that are putting the close sign up don't lose their customers to Amazon or Walmart, because I've heard rumors that both of those outfits and some others, they do same-day delivery. Now, that'd be just downright tragic. So do what you want, spend a wad of dough at one of those goofy academic institutions of higher leering, or do things the Minneapolis way. Thrive on crime, illegal immigration, lawlessness, violence, and chaos, and then close up shop for the day. It all makes perfect sense to me. Turning now to a bit of alarming news out of California concerning a number of extremely large political contributions made to state Democrats, which have now been linked directly to the Chinese Communist Party. According to reports over the past 7 years, people clearly connected to the CCP have donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the campaigns of several high-profile Golden State Democrats, including Governor Gavin Newsom and some of his closest allies. This guy's more than slick. He's more slick than Bill Clinton on the campaign trail back in the early 1990s, if you recall how slick that guy was. Now, the report goes on to say that ever since running for governor, Newsom has been cozying up to China and completely avoiding any criticism of the communist regime. In exchange, gruesome Newsom and his cronies have been banking huge political paychecks from individuals who are reportedly part of an international network of CCP loyalists who actively conduct operations and try to exert influence on behalf of our Eastern amigos. In the meantime, Newsom's escapades have not gone unnoticed, with critics on both sides, the right and the left, calling out the governor for his failure to hold China accountable for their human rights abuses, alleged genocide, and more. Groovy Gavin, he is a real stand-up guy. All right, now some additional headlines we are keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom as we gear up for the big weekend. First, on the international front, an enormous U.S. Armada, including an aircraft carrier strike group, is currently barreling toward the Middle East as President Trump continues to weigh his options regarding the ongoing situation in Iran. In the United Arab Emirates, UAE, negotiators from the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine gather together in one room for the first time since Moscow's 2022 invasion as they hold a series of critical talks, all aimed at ending the nearly 4-year-long war. And in Washington, the Trump administration says that moving forward, they're going to allow China to start buying Venezuelan oil again as long as the communist regime is willing to pay a fair market price. Here in L.A., we're paying more than a fair market price, close to $5 a gallon for petrol. Moving along, President Trump raising eyebrows again by saying that perhaps he should have considered invoking NATO's Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause in order to force the alliance to help us defend our southern border. Yeah. And in case you're not aware, this weekend, a massive winter storm expected to wreak absolute havoc from Texas to Maine. Weather experts say they expect the catastrophic storm to bring bitter cold, enormous amounts of snow, and widespread power outages to a large chunk of the country. And now a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news. And as we kick things off today, the verdict, finally in concerning the legendary career of a well-known TV personality. After a quarter of a century on her courtroom set, 83-year-old Judge Judy just scored a prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award from the Broadcasters Foundation of America. You know, going to TV court, it's really no big deal if you're facing his honor, that guy, Judge Wapner, on the People's Court, and his sidekick, that Doug Llewellyn fella, very amiable. He always kind of reminded me of former Vice President Dan Quayle, except without all the pizzazz. Then, on the other hand, you got Judge Judy. Lord have mercy. Judge Judy is like your mom, your aunt, and your fourth grade science teacher, all rolled up into one and ready to belt you if you get out of line. Apparently, appearing before her honor, you'd do wise to mind your P's and Q's. Speak only when spoken to, and don't enter the courtroom dressed like a slob.
If you're going to talk over me, I'm going to throw you out of here and not even explain.
Would be my question.
Just a second. If you're going to try to talk over me,
yes, ma'am,
I'm going to throw you out.
Yes, ma'am.
It would be my pleasure anyway.
Oh, yeah, and congratulations on that big award. And in Southern California, a Hollywood superstar now making headlines for apparently being just an ordinary guy, just like you and me. Box office giant Adam Sandler recently gobsmacked a bunch of shocked diners when he stopped into a remote desert town to grab a bite at the local In-N-Out fast food joint. Happy Gilmore himself casually waited in line, picked up his burger, and posed for a bunch of selfies before finally grabbing a seat and chowing down on his delicious double cheeseburger. Hey, it's good to know that rich and famous movie stars, just like you and I, they're human beings who from time to time they get hungry. And when you're craving a burger in Southern California, I'd say In-N-Out Burger, that's the place to go to fill up your belly.
Get in my belly!
By the way, just like a lot of fast food chains, In-N-Out has a secret menu, but it's a secret. And producer Davey says I'm not allowed to bring it up. Fine, Davey, relax. But so you know, most of the fast food artery cloggeries, they have similar secret menus. And order at your own risk. I'd do anything right now for a couple of enchiritos from Taco Bell, the discontinued enchirito. And now it is time to call it a wrap on the big news roundups. Have an awesome day. Stay safe. Have an incredible weekend as well. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. With that, we're going to dim the lights and fade to black. And we'll see you right back here next time for another edition of the Big News Roundup.